I think we're going to get started. It's right about 1:30. There may be a few people straggling to come in. From here over, I was going to say left to right, but I couldn't quite get the directions. Tona Monroe from Blount County, Tennessee. Patrick Griffin from the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge, and Nancy Fishman from Vera. I'd like each one, we're going to have an order, and then you can ask questions, I think, after each person, if you wish. I know Steve doesn't like that, but because of some people that might have planes to catch, we'll make an asterisk on this one. I'd like each of you to sort of take a minute to tell what you do, and they have the bios, but it's always nice. And so I'd like to start with.
Do you want to do it with the presentation or do it now?
I want you to do your presentation and the whole shebang, right?
Okay, right now.
The whole shebang.
Whole shebang. Can we pull up the presentation?
Should we?
So while he's doing that, and
Don't darken it all the way quite, and see. We'll see how it.
yeah. All right, that's not me. It looks good, but it's not mine.
Just use that one.
Yeah.
Is there anybody who can't see
98%
that?
of defendants plea at Johnson.
This
That's not my presentation.
That's Larry Warren's presentation.
But can you see it?
I'll be right back.
Still not my presentation. You had it up there. Well, I'll get started anyway, and hopefully we'll find it. My name is Nancy Fishman. I work at the Vera Institute of Justice, and there is a microphone here, but I'm a New Yorker, so I have a very loud voice, which also means that I sometimes talk too fast, so if I do, let me know. And my work involves helping jurisdictions figure out how to reduce their use of jails, and you've met some of my colleagues already. I work closely with Chris Henriksen, and I guess you saw Jack Norton as well. We are all part of a project at Vera that is really focused on sort of closing the front door of mass incarceration. Patrick's going to talk about the Safety and Justice Challenge. One of the things that I do is lead a team of people who works with sites around the country that are part of the challenge and working to achieve the goals of that work. But what you had it? No, that's a Word document. Okay. That's not me either. Presentation for rural jails convening, it says.
Yeah, you got it.
Got it?
I'm going to close it so we can see it. No, I'll open it.
There you go.
It's just nice to be able to see the faces when they're talking.
Yeah. All right. So the question is, can you see that? Close enough? Okay, great. So if you can do the next slide. No, back. There you go. So I'm not actually going to talk about solutions and obstacles. One of the things I've been doing over the past few months is working with the Poynter Institute on a series of trainings for journalists on how to cover a local jail. Is that working? Can you hear me? Go up closer. Can you hear me? Okay. So one of the things that we've been doing is providing training for journalists on covering jails in their own communities. So what I thought I'd do before you go back home to your own communities is take us a little bit back to basics on how to find the stories in your own communities, in your own backyards, and give you some tools for finding and telling those stories. So I hope that's okay. It's not necessarily what you're expecting, but, and a lot of this, some bits of it may have been covered by others, but I'm going to try and give you some structure to this and to trying to understand jails and local justice systems. So just a quick word on language. Journalists play an incredibly important role in this work. We are the so-called experts, but people listen to you, and they look to you. And one of the things that I always ask people to do, particularly as I've been training journalists, is to pay real attention to the language that you use when you talk about people in the system, because that's what they are, people. And one of the ways in which mass incarceration has continued, we've been able to continue to have this problem in the United States, is because we've dehumanized the people that we're talking about, the people who are going to jail, the people who are inside. And so it's really important. So we try and avoid words like offender and inmate and felon, and talk about the people instead. Because it really matters. These, they are us. And if people don't understand that the people we're talking about are actually, well, it is getting dark in here. People don't understand that this is their, these are their friends, their neighbors, their community. They're never going to see what you're trying to get them to see, which is some of the challenges that filling up jails pose to our country. So I'm going to talk just quickly about sort of who's in a jail, and then sort of cover three things that you have to do in order to cover a local jail in your community. One is understand the process, two is understand the data, and three is follow the money, which journalists are very good at. So next slide, please. So first, sorry, there are animations in this. I didn't know I wasn't going to be able to control it myself. So I just wanted to first talk about who you might find in any one jail. So the first are people who are incarcerated pretrial. They're people who have been charged with crimes but have not yet been convicted. As we know, about 2/3 of the people nationally are in jail, incarcerated pretrial now, which isn't how it used to be. But knowing those national statistics is not going to tell you anything about your local jail, and we'll talk about why. So next. So you then have people who are locally sentenced. Usually that means a year or less. In some states, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, California now with realignment, that may mean actually people may be sentenced to more time. But you'll find there are jails that have nobody who's locally sentenced, and that's partly because people who are charged pretrial stay in jail so long that they're always released with either time served or probation. I worked, for example, in Oklahoma City, and there's basically nobody serving a sentence in the Oklahoma County Jail. So next. So you have people who've been charged with parole and probation violations. I don't think we talk enough, particularly about probation violations and its role in driving jail populations, particularly because you find that a lot of people who are incarcerated pretrial also have probation violations, which means that any efforts at bail reform, any efforts to try and figure out how to charge people, how to not put people in when they're arrested, are flummoxed by the fact that there's a probation hold on them. So that's actually a real hidden and incredibly important population in jails. Next. People who are held for the state DOC, this is either because there's a delay in transferring them once they've been sentenced and are heading up to state prison, or it's because there's overflow from the state prison. They're actually holding people and paying the local county to hold for beds in the jail. Next. Held for other local jurisdictions. We see this a lot, particularly in smaller rural places, that once one jurisdiction will have space, one will need space, they'll pay to board those inmates, those individuals out. Next. Held for federal authorities. Obviously, this is a big issue right now with ICE, but there are a lot of regions where there's no federal detention facility, and jails end up playing that role. But you will also see held for the Federal Marshal Service, held for ICE, and other federal agencies. And finally, there are some places where there are some juveniles in the jail because there isn't a juvenile detention facility. There are rules and regs for keeping them sight and sound separated. Doesn't always happen. Not a lot of places that do that. But so that's in general who's inside. So as I said, national statistics on each of these subpopulations don't tell you much. Because what each community does with its jail is entirely different. And if you've seen our trends data, which opened this conference, you know that jails look very, very different, not just from one state to another, but from one county to another. So next slide, please. There are over 3,000 unique systems. I know you've heard a lot about this. And one of the biggest challenges for the work that I do is that none of these local justice systems look alike. None of them share data. They don't share a language. They don't share standards. These are pictures from some of the places that we work. And all of them use their jails entirely differently. And one of the first questions we ask when we go into a jurisdiction is, what is your jail for? This is your local facility. What's it for? And first of all, none of them answer that question in the same way. And the reality is that no two people in the jurisdiction answer that question in the same way, and mostly because no one's ever actually asked them that, and they've never had that conversation, which is why it's so important that that's where we start. So, next one. So the first step to understanding who's in the jail is to understand the process. What are the decisions that get made that influence who's in the jail? I'm just going to give a very broad overview of the system as a whole. When we do this for Pointer, we take them excruciatingly through each step. You are spared this because I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to move through. So the one thing to know is that jails fill by default and not design. Lots of different agencies all making decisions, a range of different actors. So you've got your police, you've got judges making bail decisions. You've got the prosecutors. I have a black box for prosecutors because I love that graphic. You've got public defenders making decisions about how to represent their clients. You've got state courts making case processing decisions all along. You've got probation officers making decisions about who to violate and who to send back to jail. You've got municipal government making decisions about what to criminalize along with state government. You've got state, last one is I think, state departments of corrections, which are making decisions about where to place people, how quickly to pick people up. So there's no one person or agency who's responsible for the size of the jail. And it also means that everybody has to kind of decide to do things differently to achieve a different outcome. So, oops, sorry, I forgot about the feds there. So next slide. So to put it more clearly, right, there are two things that determine the size of the jail: who goes in and how long they stay, admissions and length of stay. There are lots of different decisions. We tend to break them down into 6 bigger categories of decisions. So you start with sort of arrest and booking. Who gets arrested? Who gets policed even before who gets arrested? What's criminalized? When someone's arrested, whether or not they're actually booked into a jail. In big jurisdictions like New York, a lot of people get brought to police stations and can be released from police stations or police lockups. Most smaller and rural places will book people directly into the jail, and that becomes part of the process. That matters for jails because each of those bookings take up a lot of energy, a lot of human resources, and it can take a while to book people into the jail. So the first set of decision points are around arrest and booking. Next, charging. You've heard from Larry Krasner, potentially other prosecutors here. The decision to charge is an important one, and it affects what happens to people down the road. It affects whether or not they're eligible for diversion programs, what kind of sentence they might be eligible for. But the other thing about charging is it's a lot about process. How the charging process is how charging is accomplished impacts how long somebody stays in the jail. So if you charge by grand jury, it may take a lot longer, and if someone can't get out, they're going to be in that jail for a long time. If you charge by information and the district attorney is responsible for that, it may be very quick, or it may take months if they're understaffed. And in small jurisdictions, this is a huge issue. We work in Mississippi, in rural Mississippi, and in one of the counties, all felonies are indicted by grand juries. A grand jury sits only twice a year. So if you get arrested at the wrong time, you may sit there for 6 months before charges are even formally filed, and it may take 6 months for you to get released if the grand jury fails to indict. So it's a huge issue in smaller places in particular. What?
Which county is that?
Oktibbeha?
It's actually, it depends on which circuit court they're in, because I'm in Mississippi.
Yeah.
3 of the 4 counties only meet twice a year in my circuit court.
Yeah, no, it really varies because we work with Lowndes, Oktibbeha, Clay, and Noxubee, and it's 4 times a year for Clay and Lowndes. Oktibbeha, it's twice a year, and that means people sit. Pretrial release and bail, you've heard a lot about that. That's one of the biggest decisions that gets made. We know that if you have a system that depends entirely on cash bail, the people in your jail are poor people, not necessarily dangerous people or people likely to flee. They're just poor people. But making that change, figuring out how that process happens and when it happens is a huge determinant of the size of the jail population. Case processing. The least interesting and the least written about of all these decisions is a series of touch points with the court system from arraignment all the way through disposition. The timing of those hearings, the number of continuances, access to the courts, all determine for length of stay for a huge number of people who don't get out on bail. And I think that very few jurisdictions really look at this, and there's not a lot of news coverage or reporter understanding of how these decisions get made and how it ends up that somebody charged with a fairly minor thing may end up spending 6-9 months, a year in jail, and a lot of it has to do with how those courts function. Disposition and sentencing, obviously, what kind of sentence someone gets, whether they get fines and fees attached to those, what the penalty for failure to pay or failure to comply with probation is, and finally post-conviction supervision. And that's, again, how probation supervises people, whether there are alternatives to putting people back in jail. Next slide. So you put all these decisions together and they build a system. This is a piece of a system map, and one of the things that we do when we come into a jurisdiction is try to map from what happens when someone encounters law enforcement all the way to the end to disposition. And it does look a little bit like those old choose-your-own-adventure stories. But you have to understand how those decisions work together if you want to understand why the jail is filled. And even if none of the key decision makers are coordinating and talking to each other, even if they're at cross purposes, they are forming a system. And one of the things that we do actually with this system map is actually get people to build shared ownership and understanding of that system and how the decisions they may be making here are impacting the kinds of decisions that are made there. So next. So what questions do you ask when you're trying to understand the process? The first is sort of, what are the alternatives at each of these points? Are there alternatives to arrest? Are there alternatives to booking? Are there alternatives to charging or to cash bail or to regular case processing or to conviction, to incarceration or to reincarceration? And what are the incentives to use them? I mean, when we talk to police and law enforcement, they are called, they are in most places the only agency that operates 24/7. So they get called out no matter what. And they're expected to do something by the people who call them out. And so if they've encountered someone who's in a mental health crisis, whose parent is calling because they're scared. They fear for their child's life. They feel for their own life. If the police officer, law enforcement officer, has nothing else to do but bring them to the jail, that's what they're going to do. So if you want to look at why a jail is filled with a lot of people with mental illness, you've got to see whether there are any alternatives and how they get used and when they get used. The same thing with other alternatives to arrest. Are there alternatives to cash bail, and are they used? The other thing that you have to ask is, what are the incentives to use them? For law enforcement, for example, there's a mental health facility, but it's 2 hours away, and 2 officers have to accompany any one person. You know, supervision doesn't want those 2 officers off the street, particularly in smaller communities. And it's going to take them a huge amount of time, whereas they can drop them off pretty quickly at the local county jail. And the question then becomes also, how are people evaluated? Same thing goes for prosecutors. If there are alternatives to charging, if they can decline to charge and divert someone at that point, but they don't get any credit for it, they're not trained how to do it and they don't get any credit for it, when they're evaluated, they're not going to do it. One of the questions you have to look at is, are there alternatives, and who benefits when those alternatives are used? The second is sort of, when does the process become the punishment, which really is what the justice system is about in this country. You've heard justice delayed is justice denied, and that really, there are systemic sources of delay in any system. And you really have to understand that and how that extends people's time in jail. I talked about delays between, for grand juries, but in some of those same communities, court's only in session every 3 months or 4 months. So if there are only 2 courts and one of the courts has a trial and the calendar is too long on the other one, they're going to get booted 3 months and someone's still in jail, and there's no process there for re-examining why they're still in jail during that process. So you've got to look at some of the systemic problems and then some that derive from the particular decisions of particular kinds of actors, and that's judges, prosecutors, and police officers. I started this by saying jails filled by design and not by default and not design. But there are some people who are there by design. We have decided we want those people, that the community wants those people in jail, pretrial or sentenced. But there are a lot of people who are there by default. No one's made that decision, and they've ended up there. And I think one of the things that people want, that you need to tease out is, is anybody who's responsible for who's inside that jail, and was that their intention? I find it actually really remarkable that when we talk to system actors in a community and we show them the data about who's in their jail, they are uniformly surprised. This was not who they intended to be in the jail. This is not how they wanted the jail to be used. And that goes for big communities, small communities, red states and blue states. And then, obviously, who are the powerful decision makers and what are their priorities? How do those priorities play out in the system? And as I said before, what gets measured? If none of this is getting measured, if none of these impacts, none of these processes are getting measured, they're not going to be valued, they're not going to be counted, they're not going to be addressed. So I want to quickly talk about reading the data. Next slide. So how do we understand who's in the data in the jail? I know you've seen some slides on trends. I want to talk just a little bit about sort of what we look at to try to understand this jail population. One of the ways we do this is look at admissions, who's coming in, and then look at ADP, who's there on any given day. And they tell you different things. So admissions or bookings tell you who's cycling through the jail, the sense of the churn. It reflects direct decisions by law enforcement, the decision to arrest, by probation officers, the decision to violate people back in, warrants, failures to appear. It tells you sort of what's going on. And in this jurisdiction, there are more people coming into the jail, being admitted to the jail for misdemeanors and municipal violations than there are people coming in charged with felonies. But we also look at the average daily population, which is a snapshot of who's in the jail on any given day, and that's going to reflect who's there for much longer periods of time. So in that same jurisdiction, while only 42% of admissions were people charged with felonies, 68% of the people on any given day are there charged with a felony. This is another way of looking at it. We look at admissions by top charge. In other words, what's the most serious charge someone has. This is admissions for that same jurisdiction. You'll see that of the 15 most frequent admissions categories, only one of them, domestic assault and battery first offense, is actually what would be considered a violent offense. Most of these have to do with substance abuse, driving, and money. So you see possession, first and second possession, public intoxication, second most common reason for admission into the jail in this community. And then a lot of court costs, DUI, and those things that say applications are probation violations. But next slide. Here's the average daily population in that same jurisdiction. A lot more serious offenses. Possession of a controlled substance is still the most frequent. But what you're going to see is, but that's because they don't stay very long. They say 21 days, but there are lots of them. You'll see up here murder in the first degree. There are 21 admissions for murder in the first degree out of a total of 25,000 admissions, right? Very tiny, tiny percentage of the total people being admitted to that jail, but they stay on average 420 days. So you're going to find more of them in that jail than you would expect to see when there are only 21 people. Next slide. This is another thing that we look at, which is length of stay. This looks at the length of stay of people in the jail on that day for the average daily population in 2016. The average length of stay in this jurisdiction was 20 days because it includes all these people who churned through and are there for 1 or 2 days. But on any given day, more than half the individuals in the jail had been there for over a month. And the average length of stay for the ADP was 95 days. So you need to understand, this is sort of how you tease out what's actually going on in this system. And quickly, here's another way of looking at it. We look at bed days, which is the bookings for particular kinds of charges times the number of days they spent in jail, and that's the number of bed days they take up. In this county, you'll see that felonies are 25% of bookings, but they sort of take up 3 times that percentage when it comes to bed days because they stay so long. And the next one, this is a neighboring county, and you see something very different, which is while felonies actually are 16% of bookings and 31% of bed days, it's misdemeanors and probation violations that are actually driving this jail population. There's so many of them, they take up a lot more bed days. And if you don't address that, you won't reduce the jail population in that community. And finally, I want to look at it's also critical to look at the race data in any community. So we do that in a number of different ways. You look at that the blacks make up 10% of the county population, but 26% of admissions and 30% of the average daily population because they stay longer. And the next slide, this is another way of looking at it the same way. We look at admission rates by race and by gender. What was interesting about this, and a surprise to us and the jurisdiction as well, was that the biggest disparity was in municipal violations. And particularly for women, black women were almost 4 times as likely to be in the jail for a municipal violation than white women. And that said a lot about what the police were doing, who were being policed, and then it made us look at sort of, well, what are they being charged with? And how did the types of charges vary by race? Next. So I know I'm going through this very quickly. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just trying to give you a sense of an overview of kind of how you've got to break this down. So last slide. Following the money. Again, this is something that journalists do incredibly well in this work and is critically needed. There are lots of different ways of understanding who benefits from the jail and who's paying the costs of the jail. So there are a lot of dynamics at play in different communities. In some places, it's the county versus the state who's bearing the cost of the jail. Is the state reimbursing the county for beds that it uses up at any point in time? In other places, it's municipalities versus the county. Are the municipalities paying the county for their inmates or not? Some places you see that a lot of people get charged and thrown in jail for municipal violations because the city doesn't actually pay the cost of that, the county does. And so there becomes a real struggle over who's funding those beds. And then again, as I mentioned before, the role of fines and fees, which I'm sure you've probably already talked about over the past couple of days. In a lot of places, there's an assumption that the people coming through will be able to defray the costs of the justice system, and in most places, that's simply not true. I'll talk a little bit more about that. In a lot of places, that municipal story is really important. Jails are used as debt collection systems for municipal fines and fees and for municipal costs, from parking tickets to other things. And that becomes a real drain on the community and obviously on the jail as well. Fines and fees, looking at both what's been assessed and how much of that has actually been collected, I think is a really important story that isn't often looked at. The costs of collection, and whether the costs of collection actually justify the amount of money that's actually collected. And those costs include everything from law enforcement and court costs for processing those failures, and also obviously costs to the jail and costs to the individuals and their community for having to bear those costs. Costs of new construction. How's that being passed on? Where's that money coming from? How's it being passed on to the individuals in the community? Sales tax, bond issue, these are all pieces of it. And finally, who profits? And how does that influence policy? Most salient actor here is the bail bonds industry, but there are also a lot of private contractors for services, private probation. We've seen in some jurisdictions there are judges who refer to service providers with whom they have an interest. There have been some real stories there, and obviously elections. Who's providing money for elections for judges and sheriffs and others? So that's it. That is a sort of quick run through. I want to just see if anyone has any questions, or whether that's two questions in the back.
Here. If I can just weigh in on one, I love what you have to say. And one of the things that I think, from my personal experience as a journalist, one of the most valuable things is the pick your own adventure slide. Because understanding how the system works may take some initial grunt work that you may not think really pays off. But what it does is it gives you a sense of nuance so that if you are going at a particular pressure point, you realize how it relates to all the other pick your adventures in this, and that you don't misconstrue something or take something blow it out of proportion, or give it more emphasis or less emphasis than it should deserve. And understanding from pillar to post, so to speak, is critical.
My name is Eric Killey. I'm a freelancer in New Mexico. My immediate reaction is I don't have a question about the data per se, but can we reach out to you for?
Yes.
Because this is a lot of questions and a lot of data.
A lot of information, I know, and
which is great.
What's your phone number?
Yeah. My information is on the back, and I think it's in the materials. But I've worked with a lot of journalists who are trying to understand what they found, and I'm happy to do that.
Okay. And I'm sorry, are you able to help us kind of find this information within the systems?
I can help you ask the right questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All I'm Mitch Riles. I work in Spokane, Washington.
We do a lot of work in Spokane.
Yeah, I'm familiar. So I have two questions. The first, so you mentioned under follow the money, fines and fees. How is it assessed? Who's collecting it? I'm wondering if you can just clarify. You're referring to court fees, basically.
Yeah, there's a whole range of fines and fees in any community. Some of them are set by state law, some by local law, some are simply assessed. And you can distinguish between the two. Some are fines, which means they're penalties for being found guilty or pleading guilty to particular offenses, and some are fees that get tacked on. We did a look at, we were doing this work in Oklahoma. We found that there were over 100 different fines and fees under state law that could be assessed on anyone. And we actually took our system map and plotted where the fines and fees get assessed. So a lot of that is by state law. Where you'll see a lot of variation is, are they mandatory or not? Can they be waived for if someone is indigent, and what's the process for doing that? Part of the challenge is even in states where they have waivers for indigency or strategies, you only find out about them once you've screwed up, once a warrant has been issued and you've been brought back to court. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I have another one, too. So I'm wondering, so our sheriff has been asking for a new jail since he's been elected, I'm pretty sure. And one of his primary arguments is that the population has grown so much since he was first elected that it warrants building a new jail. So I'm wondering if there's like a tipping point past which population growth can...
You mean county population?
Correct, yeah.
I don't think there's a universal one at all. I think a lot depends on the community. I think what happens with a lot of places where that conversation takes place, and I know you'll hear more about this, is that nobody's actually looked at why the population in the jail has grown so much, and whether that is related simply to volume in the population, or whether that has to do with decisions that are being made about how the jail is used. And I think that's why that initial conversation of looking at, well, before you say you want a new jail, let's figure out who's actually there and whether they need to be there and whether anyone thinks that they need to be there.
I'm over here to your right. My question, right here.
Oh, there.
Hello.
Okay, sorry.
My question, fine. My question kind of follows up on the first one, which is, on the local level, we're essentially building our own data set.
Yeah.
Which is going to require records compiling and FOIAs and all that.
Yeah.
What are kind of the hot records that I guess we need to immediate go back home, when I get back home on
look
Thursday,
for?
that I need to be like, hey, I need 10 years of data, get on it, Sheriff.
Yeah.
What's kind of the things I should start with?
What we always ask for, we ask for a few years of sort of everybody admitted to the jail for the prior couple of years, and then we work with those records, and we can compile 80 average daily population snapshots from that, and then you want to ask for some kind of unique identifier so that you can identify who track the case or individual through it, and then think about the things that you want to look at. Whatever they've got, bond amount, reason for release, charges against them, what do they plead to? I mean, I think that you can think about what the age, race, gender, all of those factors. It may take you a while to get that kind of data, but it's worth doing. A number of our colleagues often, if they can't get it, use web scraping techniques to a lot of jails, and a surprising number, and it sort of shocks me every time I see it, post their jail rosters on their websites with photographs. And you can get web scraping tools that'll scrape that from you, scrape that for you, and then you can kind of put it in an Excel sheet and do that sort of analysis. You can also try and get court data. We tend to find that court data is hard to get. A lot of times it's kept at the state level, so asking at the local level, they don't have access to it. And the sheriff, the jail, what we often find also is that the sheriff has, the people in the jail can print out reports and enter data, but the system is actually at the county. So you may need to actually FOIA the county or ask it at the sort of county office as opposed to asking the sheriff.
Just if I can add, in collecting, and I had some experience in collecting data to do this, not specifically aimed at jails, but certainly criminal justice stuff. Find out, as Nancy has said, who is the keeper of this, and what I found to be really it shortcuts a lot is ask to see if you can meet with the people who actually are the computer nerds, okay? And say, what are the fields that you collect of data? And if you can get a printout of the fields, then you can look down and say, I would like this, 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 and this, and it becomes almost a matter of keystrokes then.
And don't forget to ask for the data dictionary. Some of that's the fields, but it also means like I'm looking at FG43216. What does that mean?
You want to be able to convert it.
You
Yeah.
know, a data dictionary is going to tell you, oh, that means a person charged with first-degree felony for, larceny to a store or something like that. Like you have to you have to ask for that so you can make sure you can understand what you're seeing. You had a question.
A couple more, and then we're going to have to,
Oh,
I hate to
sorry.
do
She's
that.
got the
but-
microphone. You're going to get it afterwards, I think.
So I specifically want to look at, in the state of Utah, how many people are sitting in jail because they can't afford to make bail.
Yeah.
What's the most efficient way to find that information?
That is a really hard question. One of the reasons why there aren't sort of national figures on that is because nobody collects that in any one way. And I think some jail rosters, some jail databases will say what the bond amount is. You can get that from the jail, and it'll say, X person, here's the bond amount. And that's, to some extent, the best way to get it, if you can get it. In other places, that is in the court data, but I would start with the jail data first. Unfortunately,
So just knowing what their bond is,
well,
what does that tell you?
For one extent, they're in the jail, and you know what their bond amount is, and then you can the other thing to do would be to get a year's worth of data. Then you can figure out who's getting released on bond and who isn't, who has a bond amount listed but doesn't get out until much later in the process. That's kind of the way. But I'm sorry for not being clear. Part of the problem is you don't know how good the data is at the jail on this. Some places, one of the challenges is they overwrite data as it comes. They update data as it comes in, so they write over what was in before. So if there was an initial bail amount and that bail amount gets changed, you won't see what the initial bail amount was because they've just typed in over the old stuff. And that happens with case data as well. So one of the questions you want to ask if you're getting this data is, how is this entered? And do you write over things if information changed? Or do you provide updated columns?
And that's why if you get court data, it's going to be a docket. It's going to be sort of a history, and you can generally see date by date by date what has happened.
But court data won't necessarily tell you who's in jail and who isn't.
Correct.
That's part of the problem.
Well, and I might have something to help you with that too, because I kind of looked into that in my Central Kentucky community, and what I did was I got a record of everyone who was in the jail on one day, cross-referenced that with the court records to see who was indigent, and had a public defender appointed. So that gave me a total of
Some sense.
30 to 40 people who were in jail on a cash bond, but were also indigent. My question was just, you mentioned the Pointer Institute doing a more in-depth training on this.
Yeah.
When do they do that, and how would we be able to?
The next one is August 1st and 2nd, but I think that it's already filled up. I don't know whether they plan to do more, but if there's, it's been very well subscribed. This is the fourth one we've done. And we talk about pathways in and pathways out and some of the trends data that you've seen. But I can convey that there's certainly interest in more. They know that there have been a lot of people interested in this, and I am sorry to rush through it. And I can never tell whether this is this is old school, old hat for you guys. You're experienced in it, or whether it's helpful or not. But I think it never fails to start from the beginning and see whether you're hitting the right level. But they also I think have posted a lot of the presentations. They have a Facebook page, so it might be helpful to look there and see if you can get to that. helpful. I think that was the last question I could make.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I'd like to have Tona Monroe come up and she has a unique story. Well, I can't say it's unique. Very interesting story to tell out of Knoxville, Blount County, Tennessee. And she is a county commissioner, although did I see that you're going to go back to become a citizen activist and not going to run for re-election? She is I didn't read all the press clippings. I would be surprised if she wasn't referred to as a force of nature in there somewhere. And she has prepared a lot of information. She can tell you about that. But sort of take it away, Tona.
All right. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you. I'm glad there are people that actually want to hear this story. I actually started out as one of those concerned citizens who started going to local government meetings in 2007. I have an acquaintance here in New York who was on local government, and he said there's two types that attend local government meetings: those who want the government to do everything, and those who don't want the local government to pay the light bill. And I'm like, I'm in the I don't want the government to pay the light bill crowd. You know, I'm more of a libertarian Republican, you know, and so I actually somewhat kind of like where you all are, in that I actually did a lot of reporting. I'm not a journalist by trade, but a local radio station used to have me on a lot, and he and I both attended the meetings, and we were just disgusted at the lack of coverage in print media and getting the word out about what was happening in our local government. So I started writing for a newsletter, and we started distributing it ourselves. We would just go out and stuff paper boxes, and I eventually decided I wanted to do more than that, and started a website and started publishing stuff. And then finally in 2014, I got disgusted and ran for office and got elected, and I refer to it as adventures in headbanging. So all that to say, just a little background on Blount County. Population is roughly 127,000. Every elected partisan office, federal, state, and local, is Republican. There's not a single Democrat in office. The school board is nonpartisan, so there probably are a few Democrats on there that might not be in office if they had to declare party. So that just give you a little background on that. And so I knew this issue was coming because we have a sheriff that's been in there for more than a quarter of a century, and he pretty much runs the town, and the commissioners generally do what he wants, and there's very little questioning of his authority until I showed up. And so anyway, I just want to cover some of those things. The jail, we have 350 beds, and it's been over that for about 10 years now. They failed a jail inspection in 2012, but they've still remained certified by the Tennessee Corrections Institute, the TCI, which is the entity that annually inspects the jail, and then their board either votes to certify or decertify. And you can be certified even though you're totally out of compliance with standards under a plan of action. And they've been certified under a plan of action now since 2012. You'll find that basically the TCI Board of Control has continued certifying Blount County based on the fact that a few people have talked about the jail and maybe what we should be doing. And rather than what we are doing. The certification is pretty close to meaningless. It appalls me that a jail can be certified and not in compliance with standards. I think that the law needs to be changed such that you're either certified, not certified, or you're working toward certification rather than being certified under a plan of action where you do very little. And so I've put together some documents for you to see some of this. But just to give you some basic info, before I got on the commission, a study was conducted to look at it. It was a criminal justice system review. It wasn't just about the jail, so it looked at everything, And it was done by the Institute of Law and Policy Planning in California. And so it came back and said there's a lot of things that you can do besides build. It wasn't done by an architect, which was important. Architects tend to want to build. And so there was immediate resistance and hostility toward this. So this is California liberal values, and this is Tennessee, and that doesn't reflect our conservative way of doing things. And so the response to it was basically to act like it didn't exist. In there, if anybody wants a copy of that, this is what this is. I'll be happy to email it to you. But it just looked, some basic stuff taken out of there. The vast majority of sentenced inmates were detained during pretrial phase, often on parole or probation violation. There is no pretrial release program. If you start looking at the statistics, it shows. I was trying to find the exact statistics. 43%, I think it was, somewhere around in there, were being held on there for parole violations, where that was their most serious offense, was a parole violation. And then it was higher than that, people being held with parole violations in addition to other things. Give you some background on Tennessee. There's a $50 clause in the state constitutions. You have to be given a jury trial if you're going to be fined more than that. So there's a lot of emphasis on these lower level crimes on paying court costs, where you can start racking up a whole lot more than $50. And during budget hearings annually, when the budgets are being discussed, the annual budget, it's not uncommon for the general sessions judges who hear the misdemeanor cases and most of the felonies, the felonies are tried in circuit court, but the judges will come in and talk about how they have the highest court cost collection rates in the state and brag about that like it's a good thing. You can go and look into the study about talking about it being a pay or stay jail, and that our jail is bordering on unconstitutional. And, it's usually typically very massively overcrowded. But I would go so far to say that our jail overcrowding is mostly a manufactured crisis, because despite all the problems I just named and many more, we are housing discretionary inmates, because as he mentioned yesterday, we have a sheriff that claims that they're making money. He's making money housing federal inmates. I've often wondered why the feds don't come in and shut our jail down through a court order. Well, one of the reasons might be because we have a contract with the Marshal Service to house federal inmates in our jail. In 1999, there was actually goes back into the 90s, where our jail used to be in our courthouse and it was overcrowded. So the feds said, get your act together. And so a new jail was built, and we have 350 beds. Shortly thereafter, around 2000, our sheriff started keeping federal inmates. He told me that a federal judge came to him and asked him to do that. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's what he told me. He signed that contract. That did not go through the county commission. And so this has been going on for quite a while, since roughly 2000. And I get elected, and I said, you claim that you don't have to go through the county commission. I said, Sheriff, and I said this in an open public meeting, show me the law that says that you can sign that contract without commission approval. Well, he never showed me the law. And there, if you go through the packet that I gave you, you'll find where I communicated with the Tennessee Comptroller's office and said, does the sheriff have the authority to sign this contract without commission approval to house inmates in the federal inmates in the local jail? And they came back and said, we can't find any law. But if you all are approving the expenditures of this federal revenue in the budget, it seems conceivable that you all knew about it and it might be implied tacit approval of this. So this has been going on for quite a while. The sheriff did not have the authority to sign that contract, but he did. We were also told that that the state wouldn't come get these state sentenced felons. So I started looking into that. You know, we were told that 2 years, that they have to keep people with sentences of 2 years or less. Well, I read the state law, and it says that if it's more than a year, we don't have to keep them. And it specifically says in state law that the county commission has to enter into a contract with the Tennessee Department of Corrections for the purpose of housing state inmates. And we're not a contract county. That's not happened. So I shook the tree, and the state came and got a lot of the state inmates. Then our sheriff, who openly said he didn't want to keep them and said we lose money on the state inmates but says we make money on the federal, starts crying that there's nobody to cook and clean in the jail, because I guess only felons can be trusted with knives and forks in the kitchen and not the misdemeanors, you know. So that's another thing. You know, we are housing state inmates. They did come and get quite a few of them, but they have been building back up. You know, there has been in the past a large number of misdemeanors in there for things like parole violations. I noticed lately that there have been an increase in pretrial felons. You know, one of the things I would like to see that this study didn't address is we've had quite a few mistrials where the district attorney's office did not turn over exculpatory evidence, and people have been sitting in jail for years for crimes they probably didn't commit. I don't know how we would compare to other counties, but I've just seen several instances of that. You know, and so I just want to give you some basic info on what all else is in there. You can read a lot of this. The Tennessee Corrections Institute, the entity that inspects the jail, they don't really have any authority beyond inspecting the jail and either certifying or decertifying, and then they do trainings for the correctional officers. But what they do, and the state of Tennessee is quite happy for this kind of bluff to exist, is they come in and they bully your county commissions into thinking you got to build or your jail's going to be decertified and this is going to be, you know. So I called up to the TCI and asked to speak to the executive director. I'm one of 21 commissioners in Blount County. There's roughly 1,600 county commissioners in the state of Tennessee. She told me that I was the first county commissioner since she's been the executive director to actually call her and talk to her, which was alarming to me because these jails are overcrowded and I just can't. Why in the world, you know, it just occurs to me that most of the county commissioners are just doing what they're told. They do not question authority. You know, the sheriff actually was like, show me what law says I can't do this. Well, excuse me, a public servant says, where do I derive my authority? A tyrant says, what law says I can't? You know, and so, you know, I started looking into this, and the TCI doesn't have a lot of authority. And so they come in, you know, that very stereotypical Southern, you know, tough on crime look and try to bully your commission into building. And that's working in a lot of in a lot of counties right now. They're feeling like they have to. But if you're decertified, by the Tennessee Corrections Institute, there's very little that will happen. They say, well, your insurance could go up. Blount County's self-insured, so our insurance is not going up. About the only thing that I could see that would happen to a county that would be decertified by the Tennessee Corrections Institute is that you can't conduct in-house training of your correctional officers. They have to be trained by the TCI rather than in-house, which just means we'd have to drive one county over, which is not a big deal. That's about the only thing I can see that it means, because other than that, it's a voluntary process, and you all can read that letter in there. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that jail standards are bad. Jail standards are good, but the certification is pretty close to worthless. They're certifying jails that are not even close to meeting the standards. So I just want you to read that. That's in there. When I first talked to the executive director of the TCI, I was trying to learn all of this process, and she mentioned that she thought our sheriff had mentioned that there was money set aside for the jail, and I'm like, that was news to me. So I went and got the meeting minutes, and I learned about a secret $2 million plan where the mayor had was planning to set aside $1 million each year to expand the jail. They hadn't told any county commissioners. They hadn't told the public. So I got copies of the meeting minutes, and lo and behold, that is in there. You will find, if you look at these meeting minutes, that it's common for sheriffs to go to the Board of Control when they're advocating for being certified and just say that everything's the fault of the county commission. They want to build a jail, but their county commission won't let them. I gave you some copies of TCI meeting minutes in there. There's one where you can find a very flippant, alarming statement by one of the TCI Board of Control members where a sheriff says to our sheriff that that he didn't have a county commission that would do it, but that we need a nice 100,000 person jail. I mean, you want to read that? That's the kind of flippant, we're talking about a county with 127,000 people, and he's saying we need 100,000 beds. I mean, those are the kinds of flippant remarks that are being made at these meetings where they vote to certify or decertify the jail, and so you can see all of that. So then, after questioning the sheriff and where he got his authority, or didn't get his authority, I then asked for the mayor and finance director to prove to me where they could assign money without commission approval. And I was given Gatsby accounting standards, and so I started reading those, and it said in there that the legislative body had to do that. So we hadn't done that. So I wrote the comptroller's office again, and I said, has something been passed years ago that I don't know about? And they came back and said, no, we can't find anything that said that the mayor could do that. So we had a sheriff sign a contract without authority. We had a mayor assign $2 million without authority. And these are the sorts of things going on. Go to another topic. The Tennessee Corrections Institute is part of the plan of action wants counties to have what they call county corrections partnerships. So I'm on that committee, and that usually consists of county commissioners and various people in the criminal justice system. And the goal is to get together and solve these problems. Well, that doesn't happen in Blount County, and it's not happening in a lot of counties. It's a very dysfunctional process. In Blount County, the sheriff controls it. When I first got elected, the chairman of that is married to a relative of the sheriff. The vice chairman's campaign was supported financially by the sheriff. A couple of the members are sheriff's employees. I was the only one that wasn't in some way connected to the sheriff. And so I kept trying to get us to have more meetings because we have very few meetings, even though you'll find in notes that the jail inspector tells the Board of Control that we have regular meetings. We don't. There's all kinds of false statements in these jail inspection reports, which I have made the Tennessee Board of Corrections Institute Board of Control aware of, and they seem to very much ignore. I've looked at that, and I tried to get us to have more frequent meetings, which we are not doing. We're actually having less frequent meetings. Last year there were only 2 meetings, and one of those was a workshop put on by the architect. So we really only had 1 meeting exclusively of the Corrections Partnership Committee last year. So what the chairman decided to do was just to not meet as frequently because of me, and also got to where he wouldn't let me put things on the agenda. So then I said, under what authority can you keep me from putting things on the agenda? And his response was, I'm not going to speak to you without a lawyer. So these are the sorts of things that, if you run into, it's been very difficult. It's very frustrating. I put a copy of some meeting minutes from one of the few Corrections Partnership Committee meetings in there where you can see I tried to make a motion to discuss things. I couldn't get a second. You can see how that. I asked to even discuss something at the end, make a statement at the end of the meeting. They objected to me making a statement. I wasn't. Here we have a meeting to talk about the jail, and I'm not allowed to talk about the jail. So anyway, those are some of the things that have occurred. I just put a lot of stuff in there for you all to look into. There's a whole lot more. I could have sent you a whole lot more. I just tried to narrow it down to some of the highlights. I could talk for hours. I was asked to gear this more toward journalism, so let me just say this. A lot of the press reports that occurred related to the jail were because I had to spoon feed the media. I'd go do the investigative research. My book bags are full of stuff of research that I did, 3 years worth of research. And, I would find these things and then would have to hand it to the media to get them to look at it. And then they would put on the front page that it was my interpretation. And then a few weeks later, things would come out that it wasn't just my interpretation, but they would never come back and say, oh, it looks like she was right. This wasn't just her interpretation. But a lot of that has been the result of me just pushing the media to cover these things. So I would encourage all of you all, if your sheriff says he has the authority to do something, read the law and find out whether he has the authority to do something. If your mayor tells you he has the authority to do something, read the law and see whether he has the authority to do that, because it might be, like I've seen, that they don't have the authority to do what they're doing. And the sad reality is I've exposed much of this and still haven't been able to stop it. So anyway, I, in a nutshell, tried to hit the highlights. I can send you all these documents and go into great detail, and I would go into more detail, but we're very limited with time. So if you all have any questions.
I think we'll hold the questions from you till after Patrick.
Okay.
But thank you. It almost sounds a little bit of tilting at windmills, but as I understand it, there's still no new jail.
No, but there is a push right now for that. There seems to be more of a emphasis on focusing on the felons at the local level rather than the misdemeanants. And, the jails are for short, they ask what your role of the jail is. Jails are for short-term housing, short-term punishment, and they seem to be much more interested in becoming a regional prison addressing felons than they do implementing programs. Like most of the people in the drug court are felons. And we're not offering nearly the programs for the misdemeanants. The misdemeanants are the ones that they brag about paying court costs and having the highest collection. So I would like to see just exactly how many of our felons are actually former misdemeanants. And, so those are some things that we need to be looking at. We're really not addressing the misdemeanant problem, that we should be. We're just looking at them as dollar signs. And that's really unfortunate. So,
Thank you. Patrick, can you tell us a little?
I have some questions for her, but okay. I guess I'll ask them at the end. Is that
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Well, are we recording this, Steve?
We don't know.
No, I'm asking that for the purpose of using the microphone. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay. Is this on then?
Yeah, as long as you talk into it, then.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I think this is a very important part of the MacArthur Foundation's sort of goal, is to draw attention to the problem of jail overuse. And obviously you guys are key to drawing attention, and I appreciate your interest in this, and I appreciate your coming to New York in this hot weather. My name is Patrick Griffin. I'm a senior program officer with the MacArthur Foundation, and I've been involved in the Safety and Justice Challenge since it started, which was, I guess, 3 years ago. Although 4 years ago. It actually started with the board of the MacArthur Foundation asked the staff to explore ways to make a contribution to solving the problem, the sort of great big general problem of mass incarceration. That was sort of the very, very general directive. What we did in response over the course of a year or so, I think, was what foundations do, which is we have convenings and consult experts and commission papers and try and find out a place where we could, with money and convening power and access to experts like Nancy, make a difference to the problem. And what we ended up finding was that a neglected part of the problem of mass incarceration is the problem we've been talking about for the last 2 days. It's that at that time especially, people who were worried about mass incarceration were focused almost entirely on the back end of the system, the deep end, the prison system. And there was very little discussion of the extent to which jails were sort of a component of the problem, because people in jail are also behind bars, and also a driver of the problem. I think, I hope that what you've heard in the last couple of days has convinced you that jail, that sort of the careless, not very intentional or deliberate or careful use of jail destabilizes people, does a ton of damage. So what we ended up concluding was that the front end of the system was damaging people and communities and contributing to the overall incarceration problem, not just by incarcerating people immediately, but by setting them up for lives in prison and setting their communities up. So that was the hypothesis. On the other hand, as various experts have told you, the problem of jails is a lot harder to tackle than the problem of prisons from a sort of national point of view, because there's 3,000 of them, and they fill up, as Nancy just taught us, they fill up by default. They fill up, the system, if you could call it that fills them, is fragmented. So where does a big foundation go to find the people who can fix this? What we concluded is that the only way to approach the problem on a national level was to try to create a network that would form the basis for a national movement over time. So what we did essentially was we said to the field, generally, to the criminal justice field, we said, our hypothesis is that jails are overused and misused, and it does a ton of damage, and it costs a lot of money, and it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't keep us safe. That's our hypothesis. If you think you can do something about that, if you agree and you want to do something about that, then fill out this application. And we got a really encouraging response to that. We didn't know how many jurisdictions would be interested in taking on this kind of work, but we got almost 200 jurisdictions, and they represent, I've forgotten now, but they represented like some very large proportion of all the jail beds in the country, like a third or something like that. Am I making that up? Possibly. It was a lot. Okay. And what we ended up doing was choosing initially 20 jurisdictions. And by the way, I forgot to say at the beginning, everybody has one of these. I think the most important thing in the brochure that I handed out to everybody for your purposes is maybe to look at the map, which is the little freestanding thing inside. And that just shows you who the network sites are and where they are. We initially chose 20. That was in, I think, 2015, and then in 2016 or 2017, we chose 20 more. And what choosing them really meant was that they showed us that they were coming to this work with the necessary stakeholders on board and some commitment to actually doing something about this. We didn't really expect them to propose solutions. And what is more, we didn't really propose solutions to them. We didn't say, this is a problem that we've got figured out. Why don't you do X, Y, and Z, and that will solve everything. I mean, we did toss some things into the mix as possible things that they should look at. But essentially what we did once we chose the 20 jurisdictions that we initially chose was have people like Nancy from the Vera Institute and from other organizations that are, some of the organizations are on this. If you turn this thing around to the back, you'll see all the different partners and allies that are involved in the Safety and Justice Challenge. We sent these experts to these jurisdictions, and they went through a guided planning process that included system mapping, like Nancy showed, and they generated their own plans. Essentially what they said is, we looked at our data, we've mapped our system, we've figured out some of the things that are wrong, and we've come up with some possible solutions for these things that are wrong in various places in the system. So it was essentially a way of generating a lot of reform activity that in a lot of places. That's the beginning of the Safety and Justice Challenge. And the kinds of reform activities that are going on, I mean, I think you've heard about some of them. You heard from Lucas County yesterday, and they put up however many, 5 strategies or 6 strategies, and explained them a little. I don't know how well you got what they were doing exactly, but I mean, some of the things they described are not rocket science by any means. Like, do you remember them talking about the population review? It was like a population review committee. Is that ringing a bell? I mean, really what that is the initial decision to detain somebody, as various people have pointed out in these last 2 days, is a snap decision in most places. It is very ill-informed. It takes place very quickly, and it has long-term consequences, but it's not impossible to go back and revisit that decision. One of the things that Lucas County decided to do was every week pull a bunch of stakeholders together and review who's in jail and try and figure out, hey, are there people in here that we can do something else with? The original conception was, are there people in here who are held on bail who should not have been, who according to their risk assessment were low risk and will get their bail reconsidered? What it really ended up being was, because the prosecutor was intimately involved in this process, it became a case resolution committee kind of, and the defender and the prosecutor made deals in this weekly meeting, and then if the defender could get the client in jail to accept the deal, they would be sprung the next day. I don't know if that was clear in their explanation, but that's how it works. That ain't rocket science. There's a similar, it's not similar, but in Philadelphia where Nancy works for us, they have just a routine. They call it early bail review. It's just it's a structured, everybody who falls into a certain category, like is it an offense category or a bail amount category? Okay, so everybody who falls into a low bail category just that case comes before a judge on a routine basis, and a lot of them get kicked out the second time around because the system actors know a little bit more about that, because I don't know, what are the other reasons? I mean, the initial decision was a snap decision. The second decision is a little less of a snap decision. So, you know, there's a county in Ada County, which is Boise in Idaho. They do what they call jail sweeps. They just there it's people in the jail staff actually go through and try and figure out who can we get out of here. So I get that's not the only kind of reform that we're sponsoring. It doesn't really even sound like a reform, but it's a slightly better, slightly more coordinated way to determine who should be held. And all through the 6 decision points that Nancy described, from the beginning to the end of the process, we have sites that are trying to do different things. Like at the policing end, at the very beginning, we have sites that are doing deflection. We have Multnomah County is doing a law enforcement assisted diversion project, which I don't know if that rings a bell in anybody's mind. LEAD is a kind of it sort of empowers police officers to it's not even a alternative to arrest. It's just the police officers suggest to people who they could arrest that they instead get help for their addiction. And they sort of work with a social work organization together. It started in Seattle. It's starting to spread around the country. But it's a way of doing that thing that we're talking about of deflecting. We have in Philadelphia, they have a lot of cite and release results that they got where instead of arresting people, you just knock it down one notch to giving them a ticket. And that has made a big difference in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, by the way, I don't know if you're all aware, Philadelphia is by far our most successful Safety and Justice Challenge Network site. It's already 2 years into this, reduced its jail population by about 1/3, and has been able, it's announced that it will now shut down an antiquated facility called the House of Corrections that they won't need anymore as a result of the fact that they have made these completely unexpected, dramatic reductions in a relatively short time. And part of the reason is Safety and Justice Challenge. Part of the reason is people like Nancy working with them. Part of the reason is the guy you heard yesterday at lunch. I'm sorry that I missed his talk. But stuff comes when momentum starts to happen in a site, other things happen. I mean, other funding streams come in. Somebody gets elected who's a maverick like Larry Krasner yesterday. And obviously he's going to be contributing to jail reductions, for as long as he's in office, probably. We didn't make him happen, but I think Philadelphia is in a better position to sort of capitalize on the fact that there's a progressive DA as a result of all this other work that's going on. I feel like I'm rambling. Anyway, that gives you a sense of what the Safety and Justice Challenge is, and the kind of support we provide, as I say, is it's money, varying amounts, sometimes large amounts of money. Philadelphia gets large amounts of money. Some of these sites on that map there are getting much smaller grants. They're $50,000 innovation grants, they're called. And the idea there is, let's just get something started. If you're willing to collaborate on something, here's some money to try something new, and maybe that will get legs, I mean, I think that's the idea of, and maybe you will generate something that actually works, and we could try it in other places and promote it around. So those innovation sites, which there's 20 of them at this point. In the fall, we'll be adding another 20, I think. I know we're going to be adding more innovation sites. I think the number is 20. And we're also going to take some of the innovation sites in the first cohort and make deeper implementation investments there. So we're growing this thing, but the point of it is not for us to keep growing it. It's for it to spread on its own. And I think you guys are obviously a big part of that. You are not, for the most part, from Safety and Justice Challenge jurisdictions. But if you focus attention on jail incarceration in your communities, and the field also starts to move in the direction of sort of being conscious of the fact that we're using jails carelessly, we're doing a lot of damage that way, there are better ways, everybody else is doing it, why aren't we doing it? I think the two together, the public demand for reform that you are capable of creating by shining a light on this, plus the desire of criminal justice professionals, which is there for sure, to do better, to do good. Those two together, I hope, will create a national movement. And, that's how 3,000 jail jurisdictions end up getting changed. It's through that movement. It's that momentum. And all we can do as a foundation and all Nancy can do as an expert is to, light some fires in a small number of places and hope they spread. So that's what we're up to here.
Incubators for change.
We could have called it that, but the president of our foundation liked the name Safety and Justice Challenge. And even though it turned out Safety and Justice had already been taken by that guy who was on the panel this morning, that California organization.
Oh,
They
John
beat us
Brothers.
to that Safety and Justice name, but the president.
Can we open this up for some questions?
Kyle Looker from the Central Iowa Daily Region. I guess I have two questions. One's a quick one. What is the smallest full implementation site that you guys have?
What is the smallest full implementation? The smallest site we have is which? Yeah, that's probably it. Pennington, South Dakota, which is Rapid City.
Okay.
I think that might be the smallest in population. The smallest overall site is Campbell County, Tennessee, which is very small.
Okay. And then now, when you guys rolled out this project, was there a specific focus on maybe micropolitan and larger sites, or were you interested in maybe the really small counties?
It was. We had to balance. We had a big response from the field, as I said, so we had a lot to choose from. It was a balance between sort of the quality of their application, because we wanted sites that were ready to do something, and we wanted geographic spread. Obviously, you can see from the map that we are all over the country, and that's deliberate. And we wanted diversity in terms of types of, like big, little, and Western, Eastern. I don't know, whatever other kinds of diversity you can have. We were trying for that. What we didn't think that was going to be possible was to work with really small jail jurisdictions. So we actually set a 50-bed minimum, and I don't know whether your communities would have met that minimum, but we felt like we needed to invest in places that were likely to be somewhat influential. So we liked the fact that New York and Chicago and Houston and Philadelphia are involved, because things that happen there reverberate all over. People pay attention. It matters, and that's what we are trying to accomplish here. But we didn't want to exclude whole parts of the country or whole, or places with less population. So it was a balance. So.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm with the Cortland Standard newspaper in Cortland, New York. You mentioned Philadelphia being successful, but is there one thing or some kind of system someone's implemented that you've seen has been the best so far?
I'm giving this to Nancy because she knows more about Philadelphia than me.
So,
not just Philly, but any.
well, I mean, the thing about Philly, and I think it's an interesting example, which is it's a big, complicated, messy city. They had 19 different strategies. Of those, 16 so far have been implemented. And they range, and I don't think you can credit any single one of them for actually making that change. And I think, and they range in complication level from setting up a pretrial diversion program, implementing a new risk tool. These are things that are complicated, require a lot of system change, and things that are just, and this is sort of my favorite policy advice to give to a jurisdiction, which is just stop. What you're doing, just stop doing that. That would be good. Just stop. And I think that there are some things, strategies that, to some extent, were basically just stop. And they were things like every continuance, every time between court dates at a certain phase of the case was always 3 weeks. They cut it down to 2 weeks, right? It cut a week off of thousands and thousands of cases going through, and they did that at another point. It was not substantially complicated. It was not a huge, clever, complicated policy innovation. It was just, just stop. Just do something else. And I think that a lot of places that's what they need to do. Some of the smaller places that we've worked, that are using, for example, bail schedules. And I don't know how much you know about that, but instead of having someone, a court individually set a bail amount or make a bail pretrial release decision, there's a list of bail amounts. There's a list of charges and there's a list of bail amounts, and they look them up. And in some places where we work, they aggregate them. So they're really low bail, but you have 5 of them. You've got, broken taillight, illegal left turn, 3 or 4, and mouthing off to the police officer, right? Or, whatever the charge is that's associated with that, and suddenly you've got $2,000, $3,000 in bail. So stop using the bail schedule, or stop aggregating. In one place in Tulsa where we work, we said, at least you shouldn't be using bail schedules at all, but at least use just the top charge. And so that person with 5 or 6 with a $2,000, $3,000 bail amount now has a $250 bail amount, which is a lot easier to raise if you're going to do it than that. So all this to say, the one thing I will add, which is the easy end of the spectrum, is to address what are often called low-hanging fruit, like the less serious charges, the short stay problem, like all the people who are touching the jail for 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. It's pretty easy for people to think about ways to get those people from touching the jail at all. The harder thing is addressing people who have been charged with more serious crimes. And thinking about who among those people can actually be diverted, can come out of, and what would it take, if you think that they are high risk, what would it take to manage that risk in the community so they wouldn't have to be in the jail? And 2, can we move those cases through a lot more quickly and try and resolve them? Because no jurisdiction is going to be able to address its jail population without dealing with the more serious charges, people charged with felonies.
One of the things that we've heard over the last 2 days from multiple sources, and which is we're hearing here sort of from all 3 people, is you ask the question, why do you have a jail? But why do you do the things the way you do them is a good question, because often you'll hear, well, that's just the way we do them. And that is a launching point for a discussion, I think, to say, well, but why have you not looked at a different way to do it? Or, is there a law that says you can sign this contract? These are the kinds of, why do you do these things the way you do them? Are just sort of basic questions. And once you understand the system, you're in a position to ask those questions and not be bullshitted, essentially.
And that's what happens.
Yeah. Someone else?
I'm Ben from the Advocate Messenger in Kentucky. I was wondering how the different challenge sites are doing in terms of making this sustainable after they're done working with the Justice and Safety Challenge.
Well, we don't know yet, because they're all still part of the Safety and Justice Challenge. But I think there's 2 answers to that. One is all sites involved in the Safety and Justice Challenge will have plenty of time to transition away from our money. And the second is that a lot of the things that we're talking about that make a difference, like what Nancy just said about speeding up case processing, that's not a thing that costs money. A lot of the things that have turned out to be effective were policy changes that saved money rather than policy changes that cost money. Part of what our money has been able to do is get people interested in the problem and people meaning jurisdictions, interested in tackling it, because without money attached to it, why should they? And then getting them focused on their data and focused on system mapping and focused on what is actually going on, that has led them to basically cost-free ways of making change. And then also, over time, obviously, one of the most expensive things that you can do is unnecessarily jail somebody. So I don't find the sustainability problem to be, I don't think that's going to be that challenging if we are generally successful in finding solutions through this process, or in helping sites generate their own solutions, because I think those solutions will be clearly better than what they've been doing, and they'll want to keep doing them.
Just one point of not exactly contention, but one thing to think about. One thing that we know in really small jurisdictions is that there are fewer decision makers, which means one of them can make a huge difference. And you know, if the chief judge changes and the new chief judge doesn't support any of these things, then then you can actually backtrack, and that's really something to follow in smaller places, which are who are the key people to making this change. And we saw this in one of our safety and justice challenge sites too, in Mesa County in Colorado, where the judge changed, and without the judge, they couldn't continue.
Although apparently we heard from another panelist that actually they are doing some things, but they weren't able to really continue their participation in the safety and justice challenge.
But it also means that you get a new judge who wants to do this, and suddenly you can do a whole lot that they couldn't do before. It feels like the challenges for smaller places and rural places where the system is dependent on the engagement of a few key actors. When you change one of those key actors, that can be a real challenge.
Somebody here mentioned Washburn, Wisconsin. Was that where, Washburn County? 14,000 people, one judge, same judge for 30 years. That's a very limited group of people here. Where you got a sheriff and not too many people involved, and you could, like you say, stop doing what you're doing.
This will lead on to our next, we'll discuss it at our roundtable after this, but with 40 sites, you're amassing a huge amount of data, best practices, things that don't work, things that do work. I think what's important for the roles of the journalists we hear are twofold. One is to see whether any of the best practices that are being applied in those 40 sites can be used, replicated as models for their own constituencies and jurisdictions. But the other thing is there a way, we talked about this informally before, to keep track of what's working and what's not working? I know you have a communications firm, but is there a central data bank? Is there a way that people can plug in to one or two areas, or perhaps in their region where pilot sites are underway and practice are underway, so they can measure how successful things are, and then report back to their own, in their own outlets as kind of models for, hey, this is working in Tennessee, why can't it work in Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of a two-part answer to that. The first part is the good answer, and that is we are keeping track of everything. We have the Emily, who was here yesterday with the Lucas team, who's from the Institute for State and Local Justice at CUNY. She's from the organization that is sort of our measurement organization, which is collecting data from all of the sites and analyzing it. At this point, none of that has been made public, but at some point it will, I think. I mean,
As part of that, one of the things I think we've been talking about telling stories, so it would be great to be able to have access
right.
to some, like we did yesterday in Lucas County, to actually speak to some of the folks who are doing this stuff and
Right.
report back.
And I should say, the work of ISLG has not been made public. The data of the various sites is their own, and they have made, like a site like Philadelphia is making a lot of numbers available to the media, and Lucas is too, and a lot of places, you can deal directly with particular sites. But initiative-wide, we haven't yet reached the stage where we're publicizing overall results.
So in Spokane, which is a safety and
Thank
justice
you, Mitch. I knew you were
site,
going to ask a question.
I have to ask it. So despite all the great reforms and everything, our jail population dipped initially and has since increased past the baseline, I think. Where should I look for holes, I guess, in the reforms?
Well, I mean, in that specific instance, both of us can actually put you in touch with people to talk to who can give you more of the background in Spokane. But I am glad you raised that, actually, because it's easy for us to talk about places like Philadelphia and Lucas County because they have been so successful in doing what we expected everybody would be able to do. There's other sites where, like I said, we were trying to start fires all over the place. There are sites where the fire just won't catch somehow. And that's a site that actually the Vera Institute also works with. And I'd say it's pretty complicated what the reason is. But, I mean, in some cases, they may have chosen the wrong strategies. And that's that's on us maybe for not we do want sites to generate their own strategies, but if, maybe we should have caught something and seen that their plans were unrealistic or impractical, or I don't know. Or it could be that in some sites, not very much has been implemented. I mean, these are messy places, and a lot of times reform is a slog, and whole years can go by, and you still haven't made that higher or whatever. So, I mean, we do have some sites that are not ready to be trotted out on the stage for sure. And Spokane is probably one of them. But I don't know, do you have anything to add about Spokane specifically?
No, just in terms of the data, I mean, one of the things about Spokane is it hasn't, most of the growth upward has been in state sentenced inmates, that the actual pretrial population, jail population, has actually been flatlined, which means it hasn't changed, but it also, a lot of the things that have gotten worse have a lot to do with what's happening at the state level than what's happening at the local level. But they've had some trouble achieving liftoff on some of their key strategies, and I think you can't sort of overestimate how challenging a lot of this work is, especially, you talked about sort of having to have lots of different people all on the same page. I think that's one of the challenges there and in other places.
And we did expect that. I don't want to make it sound like we thought we were going to have success all over. When we originally proposed this strategy to the board, we said very explicitly, this is really a mess. The reason that jails are overused is super complicated. It has to do with a totally fragmented system. These are people that most people don't care about. It's going to be really hard to make change here, and it is turning out to be hard in a lot of places. We've had some successes that I'm happy about, but a lot of places have a long way to go.
You have a sort of a Dutch boy effect, do you see, where you put your finger in one hole and then a leak springs over here?
Yeah, I guess.
That sounds what a little bit. You get a flat line here, and then suddenly, whoa, what's going on over here? And trying to patch all the holes at the same time is not always
and some of our sites, in explaining their lack of progress, have pointed to, this other thing happened, which didn't have anything to do with our, and it's hard, from a distance, it's hard to judge some of those explanations, but we've definitely heard them.
One more question.
My question is actually for Miss Monroe. I'm in Meridian, Mississippi, and one of our big things is just a really apathetic readership. People don't really seem to care about any issues. What's the reaction you've had in Tennessee? Coming from a rural community, are you fighting alone in this, or do people even care?
That's what I was curious.
It's mixed. I do think when somebody stands up and challenges a long-standing sheriff who rules the town, that people take notice. And you stand up and you question long-standing practices where people have just assumed somebody has the authority to do something that they've been doing. I didn't get that opinion from the comptroller's office right away. I called many entities, and frankly, most of them were too chicken crap to go on the record and say, no, we don't think that he has the authority to do this, But that was the thought amongst people. They go, well, that's a long-standing practice. That's an interesting question, and then they just, I don't want to touch that, But, in a nutshell, I get emails all the time from people cheering me on. You know, I got emails from somebody saying, you should run for president, you know, and that sort of, because I'm standing up to the sheriff, you know. So I got a fan club of 3 people that want me to run for president, you know. So there's a lot of silent support, but the reality is that does not translate into boots on the ground and is not effective. I would rather any day have 5 dedicated people who are willing to help me than 100 thank you emails like I get. You know, I mean, those are nice, they make you feel good, but in the reality, talk is cheap, and let's get to work and solve this problem. And there just have not been the people willing to get to work to solve the problem. You know, they're like, yeah, good job. Well, she's going to keep doing it. Well, one woman out of 21 commissioners is going to run into walls. You know, I want to mention a couple of things I just forgot to mention. I should have. The grand jury came up. In Tennessee, the circuit court judge who deals with criminal cases actually appoints the grand jury foreperson, which is a horrible practice and should be done away with, because they are serving as a gatekeeper, you know, and you can technically take things to the grand jury as a citizen of Tennessee, but most people don't know that. But good luck in getting it through the person. You know, a lot of times these people have been in this position for years, a really long time, and, you know, that should be turned over just like petit juries, or they should turn over when the grand jury turns over, rather than having somebody in there for 10, 15 years that's a friend of the judge being the gatekeeper to the grand jury. One other thing I wanted to mention, just not related specifically to Blount County, there's always talk about whether we should elect judges, and I think having politicians appoint judges is ludicrous. That doesn't mean that elections are great either, but I think something that this country ought to look at for the judicial branch of government is sortition, selecting judges randomly, possibly for terms of 2 or 3 years, or even selecting them randomly for cases to eliminate that. You're not going to ever eliminate politics completely, but I think that's one of the ways that you can potentially take money and politics out of it as much as you possibly can. So that's something just...
We could do a whole 2 days on appointed versus elected. I've been in many of those discussions. The time has come. I want to thank all our panelists. In Tona's words, now it's time to let's get to work and get the work done. But thank you very much, all of you folks, for coming and taking the time to be with us.